Welcome to Behind the Book. It's time now for Behind the Book, hosted by Tess Thompson and Karen McQuestion, two authors with a passion for books, no filters, and limitless curiosity. Join them now to find out the real story behind your favorite books and authors. And now, Behind the Book.
Welcome to another episode of Behind the Book. I'm here with Karen McQuestion, my wonderful, I'm trying to think of a new adjective to call you, but amazing, wonderful, stellar.
You could
There's
just
one.
skip the adjective and just say my co-host. I think we're going to have to start doing that. It stresses you out too much.
Yeah, but I always feel like I need to introduce you properly, and that requires a good adjective. But anyway.
Oh, that's nice. Thank you. I'll
You're
take
welcome.
it. I get a lot of that here at home. So,
Yeah, I know. The cats are not the best with compliments.
No, the cats are not. Speaking of which, I've always wanted to ask you this. You have 5 cats.
Correct.
Because between yourself and your husband, when you consolidated your households, and you told me once you keep them separate somehow. How do you do that?
Yeah, so unfortunately, the mama bear cat, which I don't think a cat can be a bear, but you know what I mean. She did not take kindly to the other female cats, which are the cats that I brought into the relationship. And she was trying to eat Mittens pretty much on a daily basis. And when Mittens gets scared, her fur, I don't know how to say it, but it flies out of her.
Oh, poor Mittens.
I know, this huge clump of black hair. So anyway, we have a large house, and it's a daylight basement, which is where the 2 boys kind of live when they're here. And it's almost like a whole separate house in a way. It doesn't have a kitchen or anything, but there's exits to the outside, and there's a little patio and everything. So the Shadow, who is the mama kitty who tries to eat Mittens, and then 2 of the other cats who really are attached to Dawson. They're kind of Dawson's cats. That's my oldest bonus son. And so they're all quite happy to be down there with him. And they come up and visit as long as the black cats are put away. But that's why. Yeah. And we tried for 2 years, and we just could not get Shadow to acclimate. And I think at this peak, maybe because they're females and she saw them as a threat or something. But anyway, that's why.
And do they ever try to sneak into each other's area?
So Thor is totally attached to Dawson and never leaves his side. I mean, it's like something out of a comic strip. And Loki, he comes and goes up and down, and he's the one who can he likes to be in both places. Although he and Mittens, yesterday I found them in this one area of the hallway, just in a stare down. And they're both sitting oh, I'm not really doing anything, but neither one of them would let the other one go by. So they have kind of a frenemy thing. They're endlessly entertaining to Cliff and me. And I always say to him, what do people talk about who don't have cats?
I don't know. What do they do with their Amazon boxes? They just break them down and put them in the recycling right away? Or
I know, that would be weird. I don't know. Anyway, I could talk about the cats further, but we should probably introduce our guest today. And she was amazing. If you want to tell everybody about her a little bit.
I love her, Maggie Marr. She is an entertainment attorney and an author. A USA Today bestselling author, so she's successful in both areas, and she actually is my attorney. She had mentioned what a attachment agreement is, which is basically somebody who's interested in your book, but they want time to try to line something up. In my case, it wasn't a big money deal. It was more the idea that it could eventually become something. And so I was contacted by someone out of the blue, and I thought, I don't know what to do. I had seen Maggie at the Ning conference and was really impressed with her and how knowledgeable she was and personable and her contacts. And so I sent her an email, and the subject heading was help. And she got back to me right away and walked me through it. So you've got to love that. So
yeah, absolutely.
I thought, I would love to have her on the podcast, because I'm sure that there are other authors who are getting offers or hope to get offers. And she's got a lot of great advice for everyone. And even
Yeah.
if you're a reader and not a writer, it's just fascinating to hear how books become movies.
Oh, definitely. And just how hard it is. Like the process is so long. And
Hmm.
I mean, I hear sometimes on some of these podcasts I listen to with actors and directors how like they can have a script floating around Hollywood for 10 years before it gets a film. So it's really interesting. And she answered pretty much all the questions that I had. And I'm sure our listeners will also be interested to hear what she said about certain things. But I have to laugh because it's always the dream, that we'll get that email from a producer like, I'm interested in optioning your book, but you never get to the next step of, okay, well, what would I actually do if that happened? So with Maggie's advice, everybody will know what to do, which is send an email that says help.
That's right. She apparently responds to those. So
Yeah.
just for the record.
Yeah. Anyway, all right, well, we'll go ahead and let everybody listen to this great interview. On with the show. We're so excited to have Maggie Marr as our guest today. She is the USA Today bestselling author of over 20 books. She founded Maggie Marr Legal PC, an intellectual property law practice dedicated to providing legal solutions for creative people. Yay. A former ICM motion picture literary agent, she is the co-founder and legal advisor to the Women's Fiction Writers Association, a member of Women in Film. Welcome, Maggie. We're super excited. We both had the pleasure of listening to you at a recent conference and thought you would be a great guest. So welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me to be here. It's so generous and kind. Thank you.
We are curious how a person becomes both a USA Today bestselling author and an intellectual property attorney.
When neither one was in the plan. Yeah,
Right.
it's interesting, right? Because I really thought when I was going to law school that I would end up a judge in Cook County. I never thought that I would work at entertainment, nor did I really think that I would become an author. I know the writing came first. I've been writing since I was about 8 years old, as a lot of authors do. I think I started my first book, official book, when I was in second grade. It was a romance. Based, I think, in part on all my mother's romances that I stole and I read. And then what happened is that, I moved out to LA. My husband is an actor. We moved out to Los Angeles. I was already licensed in 2 states and had a career as a guardian ad litem for abused and neglected children in Cook County, and then a prosecutor in domestic violence in Denver. So when we moved, I didn't want to take a third bar exam right away. So I applied to 2 agencies and received offers from both, and started in the mailroom at ICM and worked my way up to agent. And kept writing, though. But being from the Midwest, I never thought that I would become a writer who was paid, because, in the Midwest, if you're good with words, when I was a kid, if you're good with words, you became an attorney, which is what I did. So what happened is that I finished a manuscript, had my first child. Baby agents don't make a lot of money. My husband said, if you were to publish that book or get a book deal, we could pay for preschool, because he knew just what button to push. And so one of my colleagues submitted it under a pseudonym, and there ended up being a bidding war. And so it sold at auction. And while I was an agent, so I left agenting to kind of raise my kids, took the bar exam. But what happened is that thought I would write full time. But my writer friends discovered that I understood entertainment. And not only did I understand entertainment, that I could negotiate deals and read legal language. And so they just started asking me to look at deal memos. And then some of my former clients from agenting who followed me as well, they would ask me to read their scripts, look at their deals, things like that. So the law practice just organically grew up around me through word of mouth, and then the knowledge and the contacts that I already had within the entertainment community.
So how do you balance both on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. So it used to be easier to do more writing. I have to say that client service has kind of taken over my life, right? Because, I can't put off what I need to do for my clients. It's kind of like anything when you're responsible. You can't put off the things that you're obligated to do for other people, but you can kind of put off the things you obligate for yourself. Perfect example is I've been working on a nonfiction book, Books to Film and TV, what every author needs to know. And went to NINC this year, and a good friend of mine, she had finished her nonfiction book, Theodora Taylor, which she very pleasantly kind of dug at me a little bit. And so I set it in stone by creating a release date. So that forced me then to sit down and write. What I try to do is I like to get up really early, and I try to spend an hour every day, early in the day, writing, whether it's on the nonfiction book, whether it's on a fiction book. And then I move to the practice of law and the negotiations of books to film and TV and all of that around 8:30 in the morning. And I do that from 8:30 to about 6. And if you look at my real Maggie Marr name, you'll see that there has not been a Maggie Marr release for a while, but I have been writing under a pseudonym with 3 other authors. And that's been helpful because they will do their series, then I will do a series, they will do, so I'm able to keep a name alive without having to continually be releasing.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
All right. So this is a totally random question, but I'm too curious. I have to ask, being a romance writer and a former actress, how did an attorney meet an actor and become his wife?
That's so funny. So he wasn't an actor at the time, or I don't think he knew he was. Our families had known each other for 50 years, but we had never met. And my mother moved to this small town, and I went there to visit her, and we met each other for the first time. And I remember the first time I met him, it was my 3rd year of law school, and I shook his hand, and this little voice in my head said, "You're going to marry him." Mm. And I was like, what? The conscious part of me thought that was insane. But then we started to date, and we fell in love, and he was studying environmental biology at the time. But I'm a big proponent that you find what you love and you do it. And so when he did not like environmental biology, I said, I don't care what you do, but will you please find what you love and do it? And within a week or 2, he had started acting. And then this is when we lived in Denver, and he came to me and he said, we have to move to New York or LA. So we moved to Los Angeles. Now, the funny thing about that is that he did act in a number of things, but now he's a restaurateur. It's not like we're risk adverse as people, obviously.
Yes. Well, you could start a winery.
Yeah. That would be right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's right along the same line.
Make movies, move to California, and work as an actor. Yeah, we're very risk adverse people.
I love it. We could all be best friends, I think. All right. So if someone's unfamiliar with your fiction work, what would you recommend they start with?
Isn't it funny, though, how the things that we love are not necessarily the things that other people love? I really enjoy the title "Wonderful Love." It's not a series, though. I think it's very dynamic, and it's told from a male point of view. People seem to really like Hollywood Girls Club, which was my first book. And I have to say it falls in and out of option for film and TV every other year, but it's never been made, and I don't know if it ever will be. The Glamour series is really good, but it's more in new adult. What I'd really like to pick up and run with, which I really need to continue, is the Hollywood Hitman series. There's only one book in that series right now, and I just really love it. I just haven't been able to circle back to it yet.
Would you mind elaborating on the various ways that books get adapted to film or TV? How do studios or production companies become aware of books?
Yeah, it's interesting that you asked that question, because after 20 plus years, I've kind of distilled it. I think there are 3 ways that projects get found, right? Underlying intellectual property. And it can be books, articles, comics, anything like that. There is the organic sort of discovery. There's the submission process, and then there's the outlier event. The organic discovery is that I think most people realize, maybe not, that there are at any given time thousands of executives that either work for production companies, agents, managers, management companies, studios, and streamers that are looking for material, especially with the advent of so many streamers and so much capital being put into the market. So they're always looking for material. And this is what I would call the organic discovery. And they find material the same way we find material, by scrolling, word of mouth, someone recommends it, they see a book, they see a list, things like that. And I think that one of the best things that any author can do to facilitate or help the organic discovery process is everywhere that you're on social media, everywhere that you have your books, everywhere that you have an author page, put for film and TV inquiries, semicolon, and an email address. And let it be an email address that you're going to monitor, your personal one, whatever it is. Or if you're repped, like if someone is representing or your book in the film and TV space, put their email address. Because the first thing that happens for development executives, they're really busy people. They have tons to read, right? Like, so my weekend read is just stacked from top to bottom. So producers and executives, it's the same way. So the first question they're going to ask before they dig in to a book is, are the film and TV rights available? Because if the film and TV rights are already under option or somebody else is already developing the material, then it does not benefit them in any way to read that book. So that's going to be the first sort of point of contact in the first question. So I would advocate that any author put for film and TV inquiries, semicolon, and an email address to kind of facilitate that organic submission. The submission process, which was the number 2, is when you're represented by someone, right? So I spend my days redlining agreements and then also talking to producers and studio executives. And those relationships have been built up over the past 20 years. So it's having those conversations saying, what are you looking for? What do you need? What do you have on your slate? And me saying to them, I've read this really great book. I think it would be a great fit for you. I think you'd love it. And them saying, send it, or we already have something that's too similar. You know, it's just those conversations. There are submission processes that you'll find a home for a book relatively quickly. And then there will be other projects that you might submit it 100 times and you still haven't found the right home. And it's not necessarily a reflection of the book. It's a reflection of what's needed in the marketplace. And if those individuals need that type of content right then, and also if you're submitting it to a producer and they have an overall deal at a studio, do they already have something that's in development? Has the studio given them a mandate as to what types of material they want to see from them? Does the studio or the streamer already have something that is currently being produced that's too similar? My mentor used to say there's all these moving parts when it comes to film and TV. And then the third way, the kind of the outlier event, is the sexiest of all. It's that sexy story that you hear, right? Like, I went to the beach and Issa Rae sat down next to me and she saw this book that was on my blanket and it was my book. And she was like, what are you reading? Oh my God, that's exactly what I'm looking for. I mean, don't we live for those stories? I live for those stories. Yeah. They're like a lightning strike. And that's what differentiates them between the organic discovery and the outlier event. It's like kismet, magic. And while we live for those stories because we're all storytellers, they don't happen that much. But when they do happen, it's amazing. So
yeah. If an unagented author is contacted by a production company or studio, what would be their next steps? Like, what would you advise to someone who gets to that stage?
Well, they should engage in conversation, right? Because they're in the perfect spot. They own their content and the producer is saying, hey, what's going on with this book of yours? So, and I've had varying levels of responses from friends and clients as to that moment. Some of them kind of freak out, like they're concerned that they're going to maybe do something wrong or give it away. Or so here's the thing, until you're presented with a deal memo or deal points, engage in the conversation with the entity. If they come at you with a deal memo or they come at you with a negotiation, like this is what we'd like for it, even if it's an email form, at that point, I would advocate that you find either an entertainment attorney or an agent to walk you through that process. Because I have seen really ugly agreements that, had they been signed the way they were, would not have been beneficial to the author.
So when you talk about agreements, what different types of agreements might come up in that case?
So agreements, they're all kind of the same, but you have an option agreement, an option purchase agreement, a shopping agreement, and an attachment agreement. The thing is that those terms are often used interchangeably and they have different elements. So an option agreement is basically the producer is optioning the right to buy your work. So if they're conveying money to you for a period of time, what they're saying is, for that period of time, author, you will not sell this to anyone else. A typical option, let's say for 12 months, $10,000 for an additional 12 months, at $15,000, the first option period being applicable against the purchase price, the second option period being non-applicable against the purchase price. And you'll see sometimes in agreements that they'll say that the purchase price will be negotiated upon the boarding of a financier, studio, or streamer, or that you can negotiate the entire thing then and there. But the option is really about giving somebody time in exchange for money so that they can try to set it up so that a studio or streamer will want to buy it or board it and produce it. An attachment agreement can have the conveyance of money, and it's very similar to a shopping agreement in that it's a period of time that this producer or this entity is going to attach to the project. I've been seeing a lot of agreements recently that there'll be attachment agreements, kind of option attachment agreements that don't have the purchase price negotiated. They just have the clause that allows for the author or the author's representatives to negotiate directly with the third-party financier, studio, or streamer when they want to board it. I think that there's the primary reason that I think that's happening is that the speed at which you can actually move forward in projects, and you really don't know for sure if something's going to go. So why spend the time, the energy, the resources to negotiate the purchase price at that time? Because that can take a lot longer. If you're dealing directly with a studio that's coming in, say the producer, I just did a deal with HBO Max, say the producer has an overall deal with the studio, then oftentimes the business affairs will get into the option and the purchase at the same time because they know that they're servicing the producer and that producer, if it gets a green light, it's going to go really fast. A shopping agreement generally, here's the thing, it drives attorneys nuts. There's not like the conveyance of consideration, and it's arguably, people are like, but is it valid? But a shopping agreement basically is the producer saying, I'm going to use my sweat equity and contacts to try to set it up, and you're going to give me X number of months to do so. And during that X number of months, you're not going to sell it to anyone else. Generally, in a shopping agreement, there's not a lot of money, and there's other elements to every agreement. Attachment, option purchase are exclusive. There are sometimes shopping agreements that are exclusive only to specific territories. And when I say territories, it means a specific studio or streamer. There are shopping agreements that are very short and sweet, both in length of time and the length of the agreement. One of the primary things that I look at, or that an author needs to be aware of, is you don't want a producer, say you have a shopping agreement, you don't want that producer to be attached to your project in perpetuity. I've seen these agreements occasionally where it says that if the producer brings one attachment, then the producer's attached for forever. And that's not standard, right? Like these are not, or the other thing that I've seen recently is one, which I really did not like, was the producer presented a client with an option agreement that allowed for them to create materials, which is not unusual, like a sizzle reel or a pitch deck or things like that, which happens because that's how you sell it to the studio or streamer sometimes. But the thing that was not within the market parameters was that once the option agreement expired, it wasn't that the producer just kept the rights to the materials that they had created. The materials then became their own had their own copyright and their own entity. And it stated explicitly within the agreement that the producer then could move forward with the materials that had been created based on the book without having the underlying book. I'd never seen anything like that. I thought it was beyond the pale, because we all know that one of the rules is that if the option expires and they no longer control your book, they can't sell the script that's based on the book. They can't use the pitch deck that's based on the book. They can't, all of those things, they can be frozen, but nobody gets to use them.
So once an agreement is brokered, what typically happens next?
Right. So once you close your deal, huzzah, you've closed your deal, right? And so what will happen is that that's when development begins, although arguably a producer has probably been kind of softly developing the project while the attorneys redlined the deal memo and tried to close that up. So a producer may have in mind a screenplay writer that they want to come up with a pitch, or they may even, if they have an overall deal with the studio may already be on board and they may be willing to commission the screenplay writer who has a take to begin to write the script. We have a project right now that is with a streamer. The producer has an overall deal and the screenplay writer has just turned in her first pass. So that could be one way. The other way could be that the producer has a contact with the director that they think would be perfect for it, or the director could have their own production company and they could have optioned it for themselves. And there are screenplay writers that have their own production company. The producer could be an actor, or they could have a close contact with an actor that they think would be right for the project. And so then they will run it through that. Development is basically taking the book and developing it into a viable project that can be shot by a studio or a streamer. And it's all those steps to get there. And you have to get a lot of yeses from a lot of individuals to get through development. So if the producer doesn't have a direct relationship with the screenplay writer that they want, they have to go through their agent or their manager to get to the screenplay writer. Same with an actor or a director. So there are lots of cooks in the kitchen. It's much more collaborative. And then once the producer has it in the way that they want it to be, then they often have to go to the executives at the studios and the streamers to have a conversation with them and present the materials to them to see if that's something that they want to put into production on their production slate.
So at this point, when it's in development,
Mm-hmm.
would the author of the book get any feedback at all, or is that not typically done?
It's not typically done, but it depends. So it's an outlier, right? When an author gets to provide a lot of feedback. I mean, I've heard stories of authors with one specific sort of filmmaker and distributor where they actually get to provide a lot of feedback. And that is an outlier sort of event, unless you're, say, a Stephen King or a Neil Gaiman. They get to provide, I would imagine, a lot of feedback if they want to. I do have a project where the author is an executive producer on the project, so they will get to provide a lot of feedback. There's also moments where there's leverage with authors. I have one client who has a huge business as a book author, and Hollywood came for not one, but two of her series. And both times she has said the only way I will option this material is if I get a seat in the room, the writer's room. And so that's leverage when somebody wants something of yours, but you usually give up other things to get that, right? Like the purchase price might be a little bit reduced. There are parameters around it. Having the author in the room as a writer on the show, it will be subject to network or broadcaster or studio approval, especially if the author doesn't have credits on their own. I mean, think about this. Directors don't have Final Cut. I think there's 3 that have Final Cut in town. So authors are not going to probably have Final Cut. And I have had those conversations with authors where I'll say, a TV show and a movie are not a book, and it's your book. If it's going to break your heart that they change things, it may not be the best thing for you and your book. I think you really have to honestly assess that as to your comfort level, because there are so many creative people that will board what was originally your book, and they will have different visions. Hopefully they will hold fast to what you've created, but with respect, they will also have their vision as how to make it into the best TV, episodic, or film that the book could possibly be.
A lot of times I think authors have this idea that if they sell the film rights, they'll be in the money, that it's like winning the lottery, but that's not necessarily the case, is it?
Yeah, it's not necessarily the case. I think it kind of depends also on what your definition of in the money is.
It's all relative. Yeah.
It's all relative. Yeah. I walked a $20 million check from an agent's office to accounting once. It's all relative.
Wow.
So that being said, it really depends on the studio, the streamer, the type of material. One of the evergreen marketplaces is the holiday movie space. The purchase price typically for a book in the holiday movie space is not high. It can range from, I've seen them as low as 5 to 10 for film and TV rights, and all the way up to maybe low 6 figures, but usually not. That's very, very high. It's usually in that mid to low 5-figure range. One of the things that I recently was looking at, because I've been doing this now for a really, really long time, because I was first promoted at ICM in subsidiary rights, books to film and TV, is how the deals have not changed. The purchase price has not changed substantially, even though it's been a really long time. In fact, arguably, you could say that some of those purchase prices have gone down. I like to say that it's great when you want an author to be in the mid 6-figure range for the purchase price of their book or their series. One of the other things is that if it's a streamer or a studio and it's going to be episodic, then you want to negotiate a royalty for the author that is episodic royalty. So I think it depends. There are those outliers. Of course, there are those book deals that are huge and splashy, and I love those, the 7-figure book deal, but those are not necessarily the norm.
So you mentioned holiday movies. Do you have an opinion on any other sort of projects that are currently in demand for television or movies?
Yeah, so I have actually had a lot of success lately with material that has kind of a thriller component or a mystery component. Of course, it's never easy. The thing is that, let me give you an example. If you have a project that you think is going to be episodic, then you need to find a showrunner to attach to the project. And showrunners are in very high demand, and there's not a ton of them in town. So when I have a book that I think is particularly marketable, my first stop will often be to managers of showrunners that I think are really would respond well to the material. I want to know if they have a spot in their slate, and I want them to read it and see if they want to come up with a take and then try to take it out. I have a project right now that we're getting ready to take it into the studio, and we have been on the hunt for the right showrunner for COVID times are weird, right? Like the time, but I think it's been 3.5, 4 years. And we've had a few that we thought were right, but have gotten pulled for other projects. But it's interesting. One of the first ones that we knew was right has circled back to the project. So we're very excited about that.
Are there any advantages to an author of a book writing the screenplay of their novel?
So when I was agenting 20 years ago, I'll show my age, 20 years ago, I would say to an author oftentimes, don't do the adaptation unless you absolutely have to, or you have a lot of credits, right? Because there are authors who have screenplay credits that may have started their career in the screenplay space or have continued to write in the screenplay space as well. That has changed. So I will say to authors, if you have screenplay credits or you have a career as a screenplay writer, then of course, go ahead, write the adaptation. If you don't, I would say, and you've always wanted to do it, why not? Especially right now because the market is so robust. But I say it with the following sort of caveats. One of them being that you know how much time and energy it takes us to learn how to write a book? It's the same with screenplay writers. They've devoted the time and the energy to develop their expertise as a screenplay writer. And it's not a lot of people who can write a really good script and a really good book. Just because you know your material doesn't necessarily mean that you know how to translate your material into a screenplay. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that do it because you want to. Don't do it with the expectation that you're going to sell that script for a lot of money. It can be helpful at times to be able to approach a producer or an executive with a book that has a script. The other thing I would say is that be willing to let go of being the screenplay writer for your own book. Here's an example. You have a great book, you know it's a great book, you decide you're going to write the adaptation. Someone like me gives your book to J.J. Abrams, and J.J. Abrams says, oh my God, I love this book. I have to do this project, but I really want Aaron Sorkin to do the adaptation. I, as an advocate for you, would say to you, forget your script, let Aaron Sorkin be the screenplay writer on your project, unless this is your Rocky. The reason being is the amount of money that goes with the J.J. Abrams Aaron Sorkin project is astronomically different than the amount of money that goes with you being the screenplay writer without any credits of a book that is your book. Do you see what I'm saying? Like there will be a prestige and there will be a budget level that will 99.9 be much higher than if it's your adaptation. Now, everything is negotiable and everybody has their own desires with regards to the career. And at that point, it's up to the author to say yes or to tell me to go kick rocks that they're going to use their adaptation. And that's fair because it's their underlying intellectual property.
All right, this is a kind of a funny, silly question, but I know people want to know this. Can an author ask to be in the film, a cameo appearance? Can that ever be negotiated?
You mean like when they negotiate their deal to sell the underlying?
Have you ever seen that? Maybe not.
I've never had a client ask for that, right? So, I mean, I think that you could make the ask of the producer for sure. And it would be interesting to see what the producer had to say. I think it would be really interesting to make your deal contingent upon them granting you a role. That to me would take a lot of chutzpah, to say, look, you're either going to put me in the film or you can't have my book. If you want to roll the dice like that with a producer, then okay, So
Personally, I wouldn't do it.
Yeah,
no, and
I
I wouldn't want one anyway. It's like that's the last thing I want is to see my middle-aged self on the movie screen.
but a lot of times what I will get negotiated is that the author has a set visit, and so if there's like an organic sort of way where the author participates in a scene or something like that, then that's a little bit different than using the book as leverage to get yourself a role in a film.
There's something I've always been wondering. Sometimes you'll see a big name like Nicholas Sparks, and immediately after the movie comes out, there's an image from the movie that becomes the book cover. Is that something that someone who's a lower level author could request as part of the contract?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's key art. There are some studios and streamers that will not put that in the agreement explicitly. And there are other studios and streamers that will put that in the agreement explicitly. I've been able to negotiate that for authors, that they get the use of key art. Oftentimes, if you're negotiating with a producer and not directly with the studio or streamer, the producer will put subject to broadcaster or network or studio approval. But yeah, you try to get that in there and you always make the ask. It's a tie-in edition that utilizes key art from the production.
I've noticed that sometimes when a film or a TV series is adapted from a book, you see the words based on followed by the book title, and other times it just says inspired by. What's the difference?
Yeah. So, you know what? I think those are used almost interchangeably, but based on, in my opinion, means it's a closer adaptation. Inspired by, I believe, often happens when the titles are different and when the material that is on screen is substantially different than the material that was in the book.
So it's the amount that it deviates from the original content.
Right, but I can't say that is explicitly the definition, because this is all just my pragmatic sort of assessment. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if there is a legal definition between the two. I would usually try to negotiate based on, or sometimes if it's a series, authors will want to say based on the series X by such and such. That way, if the title of the film or the series on episodic is different, at least the series name is in the credits so that viewers can find it.
Now, you had mentioned earlier that you have that early morning hour that you work on your writing.
Yeah.
Do you have a word count that you go for?
Yeah, I try to do, I want to do a minimum of 1,000, right? So it's 1 hour or 1,000 words. If I go a full hour and I'm just drafting, I can sometimes get 1,500 to 1,800. But, the drafting, for me, first drafting is easier than going back in and editing, which is shocking because when I'm redlining an agreement, that is the exact opposite. Like, redlining word by word edit for a document is so much easier for me than the drafting of the agreement.
I could see that.
So what are you working on right now, either in your writing or your legal business?
Yeah. So right now I'm trying to put to bed the books to film nonfiction book, what every author needs to know. When my practice started to grow, people would just tell their friends, well, call Maggie, and I would hop on the phone and talk for hours like we're doing right now about film and TV, because I absolutely love it. And I love talking about it. And I think sometimes I forget how much I know about it. But as the practice grows, I can't do that and serve the clients that I have because I just need to sleep too. So I thought, well, how can I do that? And so I have tried to take what those conversations were like and distilled it into a shorter book that people can use as a resource and reference point to try to understand. I'm a big believer that information is everything. So right now I'm working on that. And then as far as the firm is concerned, I'm seeing a lot of agreements with apps. There's a lot of apps out there right now. Also, we have a project going into the studio this week that's based on a book series. I'm very excited about that because it has a good showrunner. And then another project that may go into production this summer that is based on a book and it's a Western. So that would be
That's
fantastic.
exciting.
So so we just continue to kind of plod along, right? And try to give great service to authors and then also help them get their projects onto screen.
I'm intrigued by your reference to apps.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that?
Oh, yeah. So, there's the mobile apps, and some of them that are out there are what? iReader, Radish, the different apps. They're like games. And I know my kids do a lot of their reading on apps. Although what's interesting to me is that with TikTok or Book Talk, my 15-year-old and 18-year-old want to read paperbacks because it feels retro to them and it's very cool right now. So we've been spending time at bookstores where we hadn't before. But the apps, it's they download chapter by chapter. One of the things is that whenever you're dealing with or subsidiary, ancillary, or derivative rights to your books, you want to make sure that you're not impinging upon your rights that you might want to be able to lay off later, right? So originally some of the app agreements, they would seek out rights for the books it was too broad. I'm always a big believer that for most authors, the big ticket item is film and TV or performance rights. And so I want that to be explicitly excluded from an app, right? Because wouldn't it be horrible to have a 3-year app agreement and then Netflix wants your book and you have given to a small little app the right to turn your book into a film or TV project? A lot of authors will ask me to review their agreements to make sure that the different rights are interacting appropriately and that they are retaining the rights that they want to retain.
That would be heartbreaking if Netflix came calling.
Right?
My God, yes.
Well, one of the great things is a lot of the app agreements are fairly short. But the other thing is that you don't necessarily. So I feel like there is this movement towards the center. Netflix just announced a gaming platform. So I feel like there is this movement where everything is kind of merging. And it won't be long before some of the interactive apps that are based on books may actually have, you're seeing short clips, animated clips or pictures or things like that. But I can't help but wonder how long is it before you actually see kind of live action clips or anything like that.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said that about your 15 and 18-year-old daughters, because that's the exact same age of my daughters, and they are also paperback.
Yes.
We went to Mexico over Christmas break, and my younger daughter, who's a huge reader, she brought like 5 books in her luggage, which added quite a bit of weight to her.
And how happy were you? I mean,
I love it.
How much happier am I to see her on the couch reading instead of like scrolling on her phone? Like it's amazing. I love it.
It struck me as funny because we were on the beach one day and Emerson, who's my 15-year-old, and I were reading the same book. I was reading it on the iPad and she was reading the paperback, and we're talking back and forth about, did you get to this part yet or whatever? And I thought, that's kind of a reversal of generations.
I love that. It makes me so happy. I think as parents, a lot of us who are writers, and we started as readers, and you want to plant the seed for your kids, but you're never sure it takes. And so now that I see them actually reading, it makes me so grateful.
Well, this has been fabulous, Maggie Marr.
You.
I love your name.
And we have some fun extra questions at the end.
Yeah,
and Karen's going to take those today. These are just fun, rapid fire. Don't think too hard over them. But we like to end our podcast with these.
It's like the actor's studio, right?
Yeah, exactly. We stole it directly from them. Yes.
Okay, the first one is, what is one food that will never get past your lips?
Peas.
We've never had anyone say peas. Who would you want to play you in a movie?
Carla Gugino or Gugino.
I love her. Oh, she'd be great. Yeah, that's a great casting for you.
What superpower would you pick given the opportunity?
To fly.
What's your biggest guilty pleasure?
Oh, I love The Real Housewives.
I knew you were going to say some reality show because of the way you reacted.
I really do. I absolutely, it's like so not me, and I love watching it. Yeah.
What is the worst job you've ever had?
That's a tough one. I've really liked a lot of my jobs. I did have to work for a litigation firm once, and it was just, and it was for civil, not for public interest, and I just did not dig that.
If you could instantly become an expert in something, what would it be?
I would want to become like probably astrophysics, something like that. Yeah.
That's an impressive answer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's your favorite smell?
Oh, I love the smell of cinnamon, and I love the smell when I make bread in the house.
What is the most terrifying thing you've ever done?
What is the most terrifying thing I've ever done? I mean, I was going to say probably get married.
That's a good one.
I mean, it worked out great, but
you never know.
What's one thing you're really bad at?
I'm really bad at patience. I really want to keep things moving.
If you could live your life over again, would you want to?
Absolutely. 100%. Can I keep all the knowledge though? Like,
sure.
Can I?
Hypothetical, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah. Like, I often think about that with the kids. I'm like, oh, if I could just do a Vulcan mind meld to give you all my information.
Yes. All right. Well, this has been as fun as we anticipated it would be. Thank you for being on. And we'll be sure to include your website and information in the show notes for anybody who is interested in reaching out to you. Although I will say, selfishly as a reader, I do hope you get back to your fiction sometime soon, because I'm just about to hop over and devour some of those Hollywood books.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun. What a great way to spend part of a Tuesday. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to Behind the Book, brought to you by authors Tess Thompson and Karen McQuestion. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and post a question in the comment section. This has been Behind the Book.